It was the Parthians who wiped out a Roman army 40,000 strong at Carrhae, killing Marcus Crassus, Rome's own co-ruler alongside Caesar and Pompey. And yet Iran's greatest epic, the Shahnameh, a work that took decades to write and retells the country's entire story in painstaking detail, gives the Parthian Empire just 27 lines. These were the people who held the Euphrates border for 5 centuries, the line where one Roman legion after another was smashed to pieces, the line Rome simply could not break. So how does an empire that Rome itself feared end up nearly wiped from memory? And who did the erasing? Its enemies or its own people? To understand where Parthia even came from, we need to rewind to the day Alexander the Great died and his vast empire tore itself apart at the seams. The east fell to the Greeks, to the Seleucid dynasty, heirs of Alexander's own generals. But holding together a realm stretching from the Mediterranean all the way to India was never going to work. By the middle of the 3rd century BC, the Seleucids were already losing their grip on the far northeast, too busy fighting endless wars against Ptolemaic Egypt in the west. And that's the exact moment the Parni rode out of the steppe, a nomadic tribe, distant cousins of the Scythians. This wasn't a civilization, wasn't a kingdom. It was a free people of the grasslands with barely any nobility at all. Archaeologists dig up their graves today and literally cannot tell a chieftain from a common warrior. They were buried the same way. Every man was a fighter, and social classes basically didn't exist. And it's exactly this trait that made them so dangerous, such an unexpected contender for building an empire. Their leaders, brothers named Arsakes and Tiridates, pushed into a region called Parthia, a narrow strip in northeastern Iran, and killed Andragoras, the rebel Seleucid governor there. In 247 BC, they founded a dynasty. From that point on, every Parthian king took the throne name Arsakes, the same way every Roman emperor would later call himself Caesar. That's actually why we only know many of the early kings by this one name. Their real names are lost to history. In a way, Parthia's erasure from memory started with the Parthians themselves. But to the people already living there, the Parni were outsiders. The locals, descendants of the Persians, were Zoroastrians. They worshipped fire, still carried the memory of the great Achaemenid Empire, and viewed the steppe of Iran as a land of darkness, the source of all evil. And here come the Parni, straight out of that very steppe, worshipping a whole pantheon of gods, which to a Zoroastrian made them barely better than pagans. The settled Iranians greeted their new rulers with open hostility, and the historical sources record uprisings, clashes, constant friction between the newcomers and the conquered population. Keep that crack in mind. Between the steppe kings and the Persians they now ruled, because 500 years later, it's exactly what erases the Parthians from the memory of their own descendants. The Seleucids naturally tried to crush these upstarts, and this is where the Parni pulled off, for the first time, the exact move that would define them for the next 500 years. Instead of standing their ground against a superior army and dying for it, they'd abandon their own territory, retreat deep into the steppe alongside allied nomads, drag the enemy further and further in, and then crash down on a foe now stretched thin and bled dry. The Seleucid king, Seleucus II, marched east. Sure, this would be an easy win. Victory and utter defeat. The sources even hint he was taken prisoner. So this handful of steppe people didn't just fight to survive. They stumbled onto something bigger. The realization that you can destroy a massive regular army without ever facing it head-on. The Nomads had built themselves a kingdom. But a kingdom isn't an empire. Not yet. To become a power that could make Rome itself flinch, The Parthians needed two things: a weapon the civilized world had never seen, and a man bold enough to wield it. That man was Mithridates I, and his name, meaning given by Mithra, the god who grants royal power, seemed to promise greatness from the start. He inherited a small kingdom on the fringes of the ancient world and left behind an empire. He conquered Media. Then he pushed into Mesopotamia, seizing ancient Babylon and Seleucia on the Tigris, one of the largest cities in the entire Hellenistic world, a rival even to Alexandria. He captured the Seleucid king Demetrius and treated him with a kind of mocking generosity, marrying him to his own daughter, catching him twice trying to escape, and finally, as a joke, handing him golden dice, a child's toy, to mock him for his reckless attempts. A state that had been nothing more than a steppe raiding band not long before was now speaking to the heirs of Alexander as an equal and looking down at them. The missing weapon was their army, and it was unlike anything the world had seen. No infantry at all, just two kinds of cavalry. Most were light horse archers, masters of the bow who refused, on principle, to be drawn into close combat, where Roman infantry had the edge. And at the core, the fist of the army, were the Cataphracts, riders where both man and horse were sheathed head to hoof in scale armor, living iron battering rams. Few in number, held in reserve, unleashed at the right moment. The combination, the archers' elusive speed and the Cataphracts' crushing charge, left the world of heavy infantry and Greek phalanxes with no real answer. Here's a striking detail. Recent excavations show that the armor for antiquity's finest cavalry was forged in the workshops of the Merv Oasis, right in the heart of Parthia. And the money behind it all came from geography. Parthia sat directly across the Great Silk Road, the main trade artery linking Europe and Asia. Silk, incense, jewels, it all flowed through, west to east and back again. The tolls filled the royal treasury, and along the routes, cities grew rich. Ctesiphon, Hatra, Merv, Dura Europus. Parthia became a living bridge between two halves of the known world, and that wealth fed its armies. And here's a paradox that matters for everything that follows. In public, the Parthian king and his nobles played the role of stern Eastern rulers, dressed in Persian robes, following the ancient ceremonies of the Achaemenids. But behind palace doors, it was a different world entirely. The nobility spoke Greek, dressed in Greek clothing, dined reclining in the Hellenic style, and commissioned statues of the gods from the finest workshops of hostile Antioch and neutral Alexandria. In the treasury of their capital, Nisa, archaeologists found Greek drinking vessels and heads of Aphrodite indistinguishable from those made anywhere in the Mediterranean. And the Parthian king himself, by tradition, spent his leisure hours watching tragedies of Euripides. These people left their mark everywhere. It was the Parthians who gave architecture the vaulted hall, the Iwan, and the dome, that very silhouette you can still spot on any Iranian mosque today. Their fingerprints are on everything. Their name, though, forgotten. Under the next great king, Mithridates II, Parthia stretched even wider, and for the first time in history, its border touched the border of a new power rising in the west: Rome. At first, their interests even lined up. Parthia sent envoys to Rome in good faith, but the Roman commander Sulla met them with contempt, treating them like something lesser, not even worth addressing as equals. Rome simply didn't understand yet who it was dealing with. Not long after, a Roman historian would admit, bitterly, that the Parthians had practically split the world in half with Rome, holding the entire East in their grip. Rome had never before faced a power that could look it dead in the eye. Their first clash would go down as the most humiliating defeat Rome suffered in a generation. And it all started with the vanity of one very rich old man. His name was Marcus Licinius Crassus, the richest man in Rome. He sat in the triumvirate, ruling the Republic alongside Julius Caesar and Pompey, but he was the one member of that trio with no military glory to his name. Caesar was off conquering Gaul, Pompey had already conquered the East, and Crassus? Crassus was just rich, and it ate at him. Starving for a general's glory, in 54 BC, no longer young, he invaded Parthia against the will of the Senate, dreaming of retracing Alexander's footsteps. He marched with roughly 40,000 men, 4,000 of them cavalry. In the spring of 53 BC, the Romans reached the city of Carrhae in the southeast of modern Turkey, an open, sun-scorched plain that might as well have been built for cavalry warfare. Facing them stood a Parthian general from the noble house of Surena, with barely a handful of men, about 10,000 horse archers and roughly 1,000 cataphracts, less than a quarter the size of the Roman army. The legions locked into their famous tortoise formation, a wall of shields on every side, while the Parthian archers circled them, raining down arrows without ever closing the distance. The Romans waited for the archers to run dry, hoping to force a close fight. But Surena had thought of everything. An endless line of camels kept resupplying his archers with fresh quivers. The arrows never ran out. And whenever the Romans charged, the Parthians would simply wheel their horses and pretend to flee. Then, at a full gallop, twist back over their horses' hunches and keep firing, striking their pursuers dead on without missing a beat. This maneuver would go down in history forever as the Parthian shot. Crassus's son Publius was lured forward with a separate detachment, cut off from the main force, surrounded, and killed. His severed head was raised on a spear and paraded in front of the ranks, just to break his father in front of the entire army. By the end, about half the Roman army lay dead on that plain. Crassus himself was killed during truce negotiations. And what happened next is something Romans would retell with a shudder for centuries. Tradition has it that the Parthians, mocking his legendary greed, poured molten gold down the dead Crassus's throat, saying, "All your life you thirsted for gold. Now drink your fill." But the most horrifying humiliation of all was still to come. And it wasn't bloody, it was symbolic. Crassus's. Someone dragged that severed head straight into the Parthian court. And of all the moments to walk in, the king was mid-performance, watching a Greek tragedy, Euripides' Bacchae. Right at the scene where the actor is supposed to lift a prop head, the torn-apart head of King Pentheus. Instead, he raises the real one, still fresh. The hall erupts in applause. Sit with that for a second. The head of one of the three most powerful men in Rome, one of the richest men alive, turned into a stage prop in the court of people the Romans called yesterday's nomads, timed perfectly to a Greek tragedy. Think about what that actually was. A total inversion, a mirror image flip of every story the West tells about itself. The unbeatable Roman legion, the pride of their entire war machine, wiped out by a steppe people that the history books would later just erase. Rome had never eaten humiliation like this. You'd think the road west was wide open now, that Parthia was about to flood into Roman Syria and keep going. But no, what actually followed was stranger than any conquest could have been. A war that lasted 500 years, and in the end, nobody won it. Carrhae didn't break Rome. Rome doesn't break that way. Back home, the defeat wasn't read as Parthian superiority. It was blamed on Crassus, on his own stupidity for underestimating the enemy. Lesson learned, they said. They started building up their cavalry, and they came back. And that's the shape this war would take for centuries, a pendulum swinging back and forth, never settling. Mark Antony, yes, that Antony, Caesar's right hand, Cleopatra's lover, marched 100,000 men east through Armenia. He drifted too far from his supply lines, and the Parthians tore his siege engines apart, then hunted his retreating army the whole way back, raining arrows on them at every single stage of the march. Antony left more than 35,000 men buried in that sand. What the generals couldn't win with swords, Augustus won with patience and words. He negotiated the return of the standards Crassus lost. Those battle eagles were sacred to Rome. And when they came back, it was celebrated as a massive victory. A victory that never happened on any battlefield. And from there, the war just kept stretching on, century after century. Trajan, at the absolute height of Roman power, fought all the way to the Persian Gulf, took the Parthian capital Ctesiphon, and declared Mesopotamia a Roman province. Right there, the empire hit the biggest size it would ever reach in its history. And the instant he turned his back, revolt exploded behind him. The fortress of Hatra refused to fall, and Trajan himself got sick and died on the road home without ever locking down what he'd taken. 50 years later, under Marcus Aurelius, the legions took Ctesiphon again, and this time a plague drove them out of the city they'd just captured. And that plague didn't stay behind. The retreating soldiers carried it home and spread it across the whole empire. A generation after that, Septimius Severus took Ctesiphon a third time, and right there, that's the whole pattern of this bizarre war laid bare. Rome captured the Parthian capital 3 separate times, and not once could it actually hold the thing, because both empires were simply too big, too strong for either one to swallow the other whole. Rome couldn't occupy that endless east beyond the Euphrates. Parthia couldn't shove Rome out of the Mediterranean. And every single time one side looked like it was finally winning, the other found the strength to hit back. And the border, like a rope stretched taut and let go, snapped right back to the Euphrates, every time. 5 centuries of non-stop hostility, and the front line barely budged an inch. But nobody bleeds for 500 years without paying a price somewhere. And when Parthia finally went down, the killing blow didn't come from Rome. It came from its own house. By the end, Parthia was being ground down from 2 directions at once. Endless wars with Rome on the outside, and the endless, brutal infighting of the Arsacid heirs on the inside. Kings kept replacing kings, sometimes several of them at war with each other in the same breath. Meanwhile, the empire itself was breaking apart into a patchwork of half-independent principalities whose rulers only obeyed the King of Kings on paper. And that's the cruel twist. The same loose, decentralized system that once let the Parthians rule a realm of countless peoples with such a light touch eventually turned into the thing that destroyed them. In 216 AD, Emperor Caracalla, furious after being refused a Parthian princess for marriage, invaded Parthia. He tore through its lands and desecrated the royal tombs at Arbela. But fate wasn't done mocking him. Caracalla would later be killed near that very same Carrhae, the city of Rome's greatest humiliation. His successor, Macrinus, then lost the last great battle against the Parthians at Nisibis in 217 AD. 3 brutal days of fighting, and the victory went to Parthia. Macrinus had to buy his way out with gold. So Parthia won its final war against Rome. It kept beating Rome all the way to the very end. And yet, barely 10 years later, the empire collapsed. Not from Rome's hammer. Rome never managed to break it in 500 years of trying. It fell from the inside. The blow came from the region of Persis in southern Iran, the very homeland of Cyrus and Darius. A man named Ardashir rose up there, a Persian through and through. He overthrew the last Arsacid king, and in 224 AD, the Parthian Empire ceased to exist. And here's the answer to why the world forgot them. Ardashir and his dynasty. The Sasanians were Persian to the bone, and they despised the Parthians as pretenders, outsiders who had squatted on the throne of true Persia for almost 500 years. So the Sasanians did something very deliberate. They rewrote history itself. In their official version, Iran leaps straight from the ancient Achaemenids, from Cyrus and Darius, right to the Sasanians, as if the 5 centuries of Parthia in between simply never happened. The Parthians weren't defeated in memory. They were erased from it. That's why Iran's great national epic, the Shahnameh, gives an empire that lasted almost 500 years a grand total of about 27 dismissive lines, dismissing it all as chaos and lawlessness. The erasure worked so well, it still holds today. And yet, wiping them out completely, that didn't quite work. The Persian word Pahlavan, champion, knight, hero, is itself an echo of what the Parthians called themselves, Pahlav. The great arches and domes, the silhouette of every Iranian mosque, that's their architecture. The Parthian shot lives on in the languages of the very peoples they once fought. They lost their name, but they survived in the bones of the culture that tried to erase them. And in that lies the bitterest irony of Parthia's whole story. The empire that the mightiest power in the West couldn't conquer in 500 years of war was, in the end, wiped off the map. Not by an enemy, but by its own heirs. And those heirs wouldn't just inherit from the Parthians, they would surpass them. They would take the Parthian legacy and build something even greater on top of it. Cavalry, Parthian tactics, that very same capital at Ctesiphon. All of it would come crashing down on Rome with a fury the Parthians themselves never dared unleash. Where Parthia held Rome to a draw for 5 centuries, the Sasanians would go all in. They would bring one Roman emperor to his knees and take another alive as a prisoner. The only time in all of Rome's history that happened. The forgotten empire would give birth to the one Rome would never forget. But that's a different story altogether.